Hi, I'm John Cuddeback.
And I'm Sofia Cuddeback.
If you're wondering whether you can really be friends with your spouse
and raise children into responsible adults with whom you have a relationship,
and do what it takes to make a homestead, reconnecting with your body and the land wherever you live.
If you just want to think more about how to make a truly happy home in our trying times,
then The Intentional Household, a LifeCraft podcast, is for you. Join us. Well, welcome everybody. Today's episode is Why Good Food Matters. Eating healthy to renew home life. Well, this is certainly something that you and I talk about a lot, dear.
we sure
isn't
do.
it?
It's a daily topic.
And daily for good reason.
Yeah.
So we really think that here we're going to be able to provide both some principles and very concrete practical suggestions for perhaps for a number of people, a new and better approach, and one that we hope to kind of inspire people that this really is an area worth taking a very close look at, and the efforts put into eating better actually are a very significant part of the kind of life, the kind of home we're going to craft together in our household. And the focus is not going to be so much things like it's important to eat together and structures of dining. Great topic, another topic for another time. This is the topic now is really more what we're eating, eating good food. And that's going to involve where it's come from, the work that goes into producing it. But good food matters. And so,
yeah, and we're also not going to, not being scientists ourselves, we're not going to really be talking specifically about the way good food acts in our body, or even kind of what constitutes bad food from a scientific perspective or a nutritional perspective. We're going to be talking kind of in kind of broader, bigger terms, maybe philosophical terms, about the nature of good. When we say good food, what do we mean when we say good food? Obviously, that can be said on many levels, and specifically looking at how eating and preparing first and eating good food, how that can actually have an impact on who we are, how we experience ourselves as individuals, but also as a community in the home.
Amen.
Yeah, and what I'm really hoping for is that you had mentioned earlier that, maybe if it's a new concept for people, that maybe it will kind of initiate a change that, really is effective and on a broader level for people. But I'm also thinking there may be a lot of people who are listening who are already doing a lot of this stuff, who have this conviction. And I just hope that it's a lot of work to prepare real food and good food. And I'm hoping that our conversation will reinvigorate them as to why it's such an important choice to do that. Just taking a little bit more of a philosophical view on how the choices we make as regards food and its preparation actually affect us as human beings, especially within a home.
Absolutely. And I just say, and we're going to make, philosophy meet the road at the rubber. Something went wrong in there.
The rubber meet the road.
But in any case, we'll have to mention organic rolled oats, or just a few other things things that we have actually found, right? We might not be scientists. You don't have to be a scientist to know that the kale that we're growing in the garden is good for you. And I don't exactly care what it does down there. I just know it's doing good things. And so, certain things are kind of, intuitively obvious. And I think it's good for us to kind of affirm those, and obviously homegrown stuff, fresher stuff, blah, blah, blah. And again, that these things matter. On which score, I have a quotation. All right, this is 50,000 feet. You're going to love this quotation. This is from St. Thomas Aquinas. He's commenting on the work of Aristotle, Aristotle's Politics. He's talking about economia, the art of household management. And here we are, 2 sentences. Each craft needs to have suitable tools if it is to perform its task. As, for example, a smith needs a hammer if he is to make a knife. In the same way, the manager of a household needs property as an instrument for his work. All right. Well,
That is 50,000 feet.
yeah. Okay. What's that got to? Does that have
Yeah.
anything to do with food? I thought it did. Wait a second here. Now look. I mean, the context is always we are managers of our household. Our fundamental approach is we are tasked with the beautiful, amazing responsibility of crafting the good life in our home. This is kind of, if we're married, this is at the center of our vocation. How are we crafting the good life in our home? All of us, regardless of whether we're married or not, are going to be trying to craft a good life in the home. And so everything it kind of comes back to what fundamentally is that project. And in the reason I love this is, first of all, again, hey, we're life crafting, right? Here's Aristotle and Aquinas referring to what you do in the home as kind of being this ultimate craft, just as the blacksmith needs tools to do his specific work. Those crafting the good human life in a household need tools specific to that craft. And he refers to that broadly as property. So first of all, I'd just like to say, beautiful philosophical point, all the material things that we own, the things that you and I would normally call property, all the material things that we own, here he's casting as, see them as instruments of the work of crafting the good life in your home. What a beautiful way to see. I mean, this is why we, hopefully in God's providence, are able to own a house. This is why you have a car. This is why you have furniture in the house. This is why you have the various other tools in the house, because you need them to craft a good life. Well, again, what ultimately is that work? This work is most of all a work that is going for the kind of deeper reality of forming persons.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But material things are key to that.
Yeah.
Food is an instrument of our crafting a human life. It's kind of most obvious first one. Right? Well, what are the instruments? What's the property? What's the material stuff you have to own? You got to own that one. You can't borrow food. I mean, we have to come into the possession of food, food of a certain kind that is suited towards fulfilling the work of the household, and can always keep things in that context of the work of the household, crafting that deeper life, a life that particularly consists in growing in character, growing in wisdom, forming the various virtues, forming deeper relationships. That's why all material property is important. That's always the fundamental Aristotle Aquinas principle in the economy of the home. Everything material has importance because it serves things that are beyond the material. Food is an obvious instance of this.
That is an amazing point. And you started us out at 50,000 feet, and then you brought us way down to food. So that was awesome. We saw that connection. I just want to back up a little bit, maybe at 30,000 feet. I know it's probably the topic of a different discussion, but it so struck me as you said it, to think of property as something that is fundamentally for the sake of greater spiritual realities. That totally changes our attitude about the things that we own and bring into our home. I think so much we often think of property as something that we own for the sake of owning it. And maybe that's where keeping up with the Joneses becomes an issue, right? And so we tend to think of the things we acquire as just for their own sake. And that's why you end up with just a proliferation of stuff, and your life is just so full of stuff that begins to almost suffocate you. And I think it's amazing to put it in that perspective, that it almost gives you almost also a rule of how do we acquire the things that we bring into our home. Is this going to serve the end of the flourishing of the people within it? And it's, I've lived with you how many years, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. But I guess we all just need to be reminded.
I haven't been doing this. Oh, well.
No. It's just, I think we all need to be reminded periodically of it's not reminded. It's almost just like shift our perspective to see that again. And so I think it's great to be talking about it.
I love to, I've been teaching this stuff, but this quotation, I'm teaching this course right now, family and household. This quotation struck me anew. We need to have a specific conversation about that whole approach I mean, think how cool that will be. The things like, should we buy this piece of furniture or not? Should we buy this painting? Should we buy this machine? Whatever it is that going to be a good instrument to craft the good life in your home? If so, great. If not, why would we get it?
That puts such a beautiful limitation on what is otherwise endless possibilities that becomes
Exactly.
overwhelming. But I have
Exactly.
to say, as regards food, that's a fabulous way of even beginning the discussion about why food in our home matters. Because
Good.
I think we have in the modern world, I think we have the same attitude toward food that we do in the acquisition of property and things.
Good.
That it's
All
just
right.
something that, oh, I want that. I want that. Everyone's eating that. Oh, that's convenient. Or whatever. And our standard for choosing, is this the food we're going to eat, isn't how does it serve the end of the household? It's something else.
Yeah.
And it can be a
Yeah.
variety of other,
Yeah.
all kinds
Yeah.
of things. And a huge one, it's driven by advertisement, right?
Right.
All kinds of
Right.
advertisement, not just for cheap, bad food, but also like designer food that's supposed to be really performance oriented, et cetera. We have to always be assessing what we're bringing into our household and in particular into our bodies, according to the rule. How does this fulfill the end of the household, just the flourishing of the people
Amen.
within it?
Always
And
in view of the end.
not just the people, but the relationships of the people within the household. So, because you could be tempted to say about food,
Yeah.
oh, it's a question of, oh, flourishing. Oh, they're bodily flourishing. Are they going to feel good? Are they going to feel bad? Are they going to grow well? But if it really serves the household, then there's also the further dimension of saying, and how does it impact the relationship within the households?
Exactly. But we need to look at both of that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very glad you liked my opening quotation. Otherwise, it would have been very awkward to try to salvage this conversation.
No, that's great. Loved it.
So we're thinking here in terms of a new approach to food as an instrument in crafting the good life.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna try to think about the whole realm of what we're eating, how we get it, how we prepare it, in view of what is the way to have this instrument be best suited to its end. Some food serves that end better than others.
Mm-hmm.
Some practices of eating will serve that end better than others. Well, so how can we think about that? Well, I'd like to make a suggestion. You already just said this, that you said, well, let's not reduce it to, and then blah, blah. We're not going to reduce it to, but I think we should begin with simply bodily health.
Yeah.
I mean, bodily, all the wise have seen this. There's nothing you can do to absolutely assure bodily health. And one can flourish as a human being, even if one is not in the tip-top shape of bodily health. Yeah. That's a very important thing to realize. Mm-hmm. That said, it is only reasonable that we do what we reasonably can to be in the best health that we can. Mm-hmm. Very, very straightforward, right? Particularly thinking about with the children, but of course, not just ourselves. We should eat well. There's so many different ways you could say that, out of respect for our body as a temple of the Holy Spirit, respect to the dignity of the human person and our composite nature of soul and body, recognizing that all spiritual functions of the human person are exercised in a way that is, at least in some real way, dependent upon what's going on in the body. The most obvious things that we look at in a human nature course is that are the structures of how we discover reality and know and then think about things and contemplate things is very much rooted in our imagination. Mm-hmm. Our imagination is a power that is exercised in the brain. Body. If you have brain fog, it's going to be very hard to think clearly about things. Mm-hmm. And so it's just, we can multiply that very quickly and easily. Mm-hmm. I mean, we pivot to behavioral problems in children. Often, obviously not always, but often can be rooted in some type of chemical imbalance. Well, where did this chemical imbalance come from?
I just also wanted to say that, as regards, why would we be so concerned about the body in that respect? I mean, the other tools that we have within our household, we are concerned to understand how they work and care for them properly so they continue working. I mean, that analogy obviously isn't the perfect analogy because the body is so different because it's a question of the person. But if you have a car, you're not going to be pouring orange juice in the gas tank because it's cheaper and easier than gasoline. I mean, if that's what it takes for it to run properly. So
Right.
why in the world would we take less care of our body than we do of, tools, inanimate tools that are part of our household?
For sure, for sure, and I like that. That's a very helpful analogy. All instruments should be kept in good shape in view of their end.
Mm-hmm.
And you might say, the body is more than an instrument.
Yes, we don't want to reduce it.
But it is an instrument.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, again, Aristotle and Aquinas were very much, it's not as though you, to get very philosophical for a moment, some thinkers have thought you are a spirit that just uses a body kind of as an instrument. Mm-hmm. No, that's certainly not what's going on here. You are a soul and body composite, two principles of one being. But nonetheless, that appreciated, you can in that context still say that to serve spiritual ends, the body acts in a very important sense as an instrument. Mm-hmm. And to think in terms of it being sharp, healthy, fit, in view of that is the best reason. What better reason is there to take good care of the body? So we're not going to branch off now into something obviously related, because everything when it comes to the good life is always interrelated. Yeah, we're not going to start talking about exercise, which is so important, right? Fresh air and clean water. But we're looking at the food, and we just start with kind of the obvious thing that. And this in itself is already a challenge, that we should be thinking in terms, our main concern with the food is it going to make us healthy? Mm-hmm. And we have been trained, you mentioned advertising, we have been so trained by the advertising to make more primary how things taste. Mm-hmm. And this is an interesting thing. Should food taste good? Absolutely. And I think here in a kind of holistic approach, the ironic, paradoxical, in a sense, beautiful thing is here, the more that we really start to do this, we're going to see that eating healthy actually does lead to, I think, the richest kind of kind of bodily pleasure of food tasting good. Mm-hmm. But it's partially because there is a kind of restraint, and you're not simply prioritizing how's this taste. You're willing to eat some things that don't taste so good. Mm-hmm. When you make the real end primary, everything else falls into place too. And with food, the most important end, the most important thing we should be asking ourselves as we go through the supermarket or wherever we're acquiring our food, and hopefully it can be for many of us at least somewhat more than just the supermarket. Mm-hmm. How is it healthy food?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I definitely want to add to that taste is something that is definitely conditioned.
Great point.
So it's not like taste is absolute. You can train yourself to enjoy or appreciate tastes that you didn't in a different circumstance. So it's just like the moral appetite. It can be trained to desire certain things. So
I think that's worth lingering on here for a moment, because I could hear in my mind practically one saying, because hey, I at least sometimes do the shopping and am cognizant of what anyone who's shopping or looking for food is aware of. I'm aware of this when I'm growing things in the garden. Will anybody eat this? Mm-hmm. And we can be in a little bit of a trap here. And maybe some people, listening to this conversation right now might think, well, gosh, my kids will never eat any of that stuff. I'm going to say, well, this might be a little bracing, but I think we can do something about that. It's just going to take some work, because, as you said, as is seen in so many areas, very important areas too, music, tastes need to be cultivated. Mm-hmm. People can have bad taste in music because they've had a bad diet of music. Mm-hmm. People can have bad taste in food. And indeed, so many of our children, and I guess this fits in with so many key issues in the household, for how many parents kind of struggling to get by in the sense of take care of their children and not be driven crazy and find the time. And I don't say that at all in a critical way, right?
Oh no, we've been there.
That use food as a babysitter / as a just give them a lollipop, and this is understandable, but we're going to have to look at the long haul. We're going to have to ask some hard questions. Have we gotten into a situation where we've taken the food that's produced by an industry that is trying to get us and our children hooked on a certain kind of taste, very often one that is a sweet taste, right? I mean, it's just so interesting, even philosophically, that has become so dominant that you could easily, I'm sure, find a test that would show that for people now to just, in general, your kind of average consumer, what they consider to be tasting good is much sweeter
Mm-hmm.
than what was considered tasting good X number of years ago,
Mm-hmm.
because we've been conditioned by the sweetening being put in these foods to make us taste good, make it
Mm-hmm.
taste good. We want it,
I
right?
have to just share a little anecdote in that regard. There's a recipe for a poppy seed cake that my grandmother loved to make. It's on the it's you buy canned poppy seed. It's on the can, on the inside wrapper of the label. And I just years and years ago, early in our marriage, just ripped off that recipe and put it in my cookbook because I thought, oh, I just want to make sure I never lose this recipe. And in the meantime, the can has been continued to be produced for years and years and years. And so I can still get it and I can still rip off the label and read the recipe on the inside. One time I bought it and the recipe wasn't on the inside and I panicked because I thought, oh my goodness, they're not printing this recipe anymore. So I went back to my recipe from 20 years ago and the sugar was significantly less in the recipe.
Wow.
And so it was just interesting to see on black and white that even recipes are being printed with a higher. I just have to chuckle as we're talking about this, that already in this, however few minutes we've been talking about this topic, it seems like we've kind of been tempted to go off on a little rabbit warren and on different issues, one of, parenting and other issues. And it's kind of striking to me. I was thinking as you were speaking that clearly this topic about food and how we eat and how we prepare food must be a very important thing for us to consider. Because if you think of the things that we need, the tools that we need to live as human beings in a household, you need chair, you need clothing, chairs, you need, tables, but none of them have the immediacy and the importance that food has. You have to eat. There is no substitute. You can sit on a floor. You can, weave a blanket from, I don't know, fibers and, grasses or whatever like that. Okay, it's not ideal, but everyone has to eat. And so clearly, this is a very, very important tool. The fact that the Lord has made it, that we need it multiple times throughout the same day and every day until the day we die. I assure you, this is very present to me as I'm preparing yet another meal. Sometimes I think, can everybody just not need to eat today?
Yeah.
So I think that must underscore the fact that even in our conversation about food, it keeps making us want to talk about other things that are so important to what it means to be human. I just think that's fascinating because you think food, it's just food. What's food? And yet it's so amazing that it's like kind of almost without trying, it's like the springboard to other important topics. Yeah. So anyway, let's keep talking about it.
It's all interconnected, right? That actually brings to my mind something that might be an uncomfortable thing to mention, but at times you and I have talked about, should we encourage people when it comes to dating to just kind of bring up early on, hey, how do you do food? Because it's such a big, big part of life. And it's not unimportant. And to have a difference on that, I'm not saying it can't be overcome, but it is significant.
And part of the reason it's significant is because there is a profound emotional connection to food.
Good point.
Which is part of the reason I just say right now, as we're talking, especially if this conversation kind of initiates a desire to change, especially within a household where there's more than one member, to really be appreciative of the fact that that change can sometimes be very difficult, because maybe it comes from our parents babysitting us with food. But there's a very emotional connection to how we eat that can make it very hard to change our eating habits and patterns.
That's a great point. And we have to be aware of that always in our craft. We're crafting a good life, doing our best to, and that you have to take that, what's possible, what's doable. You decide we shouldn't be eating this anymore. All right, but can't necessarily go cold turkey,
right,
as we say, and to recognize that we're incremental steps. But at the end of this conversation, I'm really going to just recommend among the things that we've talked about, what are maybe a couple of steps that we could take. For most importantly, if we're going to have a new attitude, new importance of appreciating food, trying to have truly good food. What do we mean by good food? How are we going to go about that? Well, first of all, then we're just a new approach. but then maybe start with a new approach right away, but then incremental particular
Application, sure.
changes, right?
Yeah.
You can't just throw
Yeah.
out all the food in the pantry kind of thing.
Yeah. And I have to say that wherever the change is difficult, wherever there's an emotional difficulty, it really helps if you understand the principle, why it's good. It helps you desire it, which makes the change easier. So let's talk some more about what is good food and why is this important for us to pursue in the household?
Well, can we just then kind of take as established, and again, not something that we have to try to defend in some type of scientific way, certain kinds of foods are better for you, and we should prioritize those.
All right, tell me what those are.
Even if they aren't, even if they don't taste better.
Okay.
Right. I mean, vegetables. For instance, it would be another thing that would be very interesting to look into is what percent of the human diet was vegetables and what percent of the human diet now is vegetables and how that connects to other, we're living longer because of medical advances that keep us alive longer. I think there's some interesting science as regards the health issues and more more disease and so forth, because of our not eating as well, at least as a number of people did earlier, right? As regard, and so things as simple as fresher food, non-processed foods, right? We've all heard the thing of when you go into maybe not everyone has heard it. When you go into the supermarket, you should tend to go around the outside aisle.
The safest food is on the outside perimeter.
The inside, because almost all the processed foods are those aisles kind of in the middle, and things more like your fruits and vegetables, your meats. So
when you say vegetables, really what you're driving at, it sounds like, is things that are fresher, closer to their original origin, and the less processing tends to make the food be more whole and nutritious for us. Is that what you're saying?
I think that's pretty straightforward. Again, I'm not going to pretend to be the nutrition expert. I mean, I'm going to say,
but if we're looking for a
these
principle,
things are fairly straightforwardly verifiable, right?
So we're looking for a principle
that fresh food that is
whole,
less processed, and now this immediately, to get a little further in the weeds, but we just need to note this more than ever. We're going to have to be educated eaters. And I'm going to end up reading a couple of suggestions from Wendell Berry's essay called "The Pleasures of Eating." But just one of his suggestions is we now need to educate ourselves about what things are added to our foods, why are they added to our foods, and how does that affect the health of our foods. It's annoying and frustrating that
we can't just eat.
Yes, that, and also it's just hard to find these things out, and we can't pretend, we can't kill ourselves over figuring everything out here. To some extent, you and I have often said this to one another. Well, we're just going to have to do our best and go with it. Certain additives we might not be able to avoid, or might not know for sure. Well, just how bad is that? I don't think it's wacky to say, well, I'm sure there's some very good people in the Food and Drug Administration. I certainly don't take for granted that if something is, quote, FDA approved, that it's going to be healthy for me, because I just think it would be very naive in our day and age to not recognize that business interests are exceedingly powerful. And there's obvious instances already historically that are easily documentable of how decisions on these things were influenced by factors that were other than actual good health. And so to some extent, while not getting this attitude of it's us against everybody, we have to be willing to be somewhat independent, self-educating, self-thinking, and common sense. Again, look to others who have looked into this more, educate ourselves on a whole set of. An obvious example. Everybody knows that high fructose corn syrup is one of the main additives that they put into processed foods, and it's verifiably bad for you, right? But it's done because it makes it taste more sweet. So are we alert to, hey, just going, and unfortunately, this isn't a lot of stuff.
Read the label.
This isn't a lot. Your donuts and your on and on of baked things goods, that people,
and even things you wouldn't think of, pickles. Things that are normally you would think of fermented foods often have it in it. So For myself, you grew up in a family that was very aware of health and its of food and its nutritional value and it's the relationship to your health. I grew up in a family that didn't eat a lot of the processed foods, but that was for financial reasons. The snacks and chips and fun stuff that was more processed was more expensive. And so it wasn't so much because my family was very aware, but kind of almost accidentally, we ended up eating more healthily, although certainly we did fall, not being aware, we did fall into certain other habits that were not good. So for me, when we started our family, and being the one who's primarily responsible for preparation of food, purchasing preparation, even though of course we always talked about it, a principle that was very, very helpful for me because it is in fact information overwhelming and you feel like you have to be a detective to figure out all the little nuances and details and things you have to avoid. And frankly, you could become neurotic about it. And so I just used a very simple foundational principle by which to make a judgment is how close to its source is it? How fresh is it? And how processed is it? And so I would just always be, and always the principle that kind of drove me was actually one that I learned from you in the garden. You've always been growing food for us in our garden. You know, even the garden was small. There was something coming out of the garden. And sometimes it's actually a point of contention between us that right as we're getting ready to sit down to dinner, you want to run outside and pick the lettuce for the salad because kind of in a jocose way, but actually really speaking from the heart. At one point you said, oh, this lettuce is practically pulsating still. It was just picked. And, you know, it's kind of a funny thing, but it's always kind of provided an image in my mind of the kind of food you want to be exposed to. It's practically pulsating. It's so close to where it came from. And so, you know, obviously we have to buy a lot of things at the grocery store that we're not producing, but that has kind of become my principle in definitely shopping on the outside perimeter. And even the outside perimeter, certain things have to be avoided. But so just to give people kind of a straightforward principle, if this is very new, is how unadulterated it is. How close is it to its original intended form? And that just gives you a little principle. You know, that I've never seen anything grow that looks like that. I guess I won't put that into my body. You know what I mean? So, I mean, it's not, I mean, obviously wheat gets baked into bread. It doesn't look like, you know, so I'm not trying to be ridiculous here, but there's a lot of food that we eat that is puffed and extruded and changed in color. And you could just say, I don't think that color is how it came out of the ground. Maybe we won't put that into our body, you know?
I think it is good to have a certain skepticism might not be the right word, but just a sense, again, we don't have to do some big, expose of the food industry. But clearly there is a problem. I mean, this is a very Aristotle point. When food very much becomes an industry, then the main criteria determining how things are grown and processed is not fundamentally their health. Mm-hmm. And Wendell Berry writes it at length on that. And it's rather straightforward. This is not some conspiratorial approach. It's kind of obvious that we are going to have to kind of step up and, ask some hard questions. On the being closer to nature, here's the thing. There obviously is an art of kind of preserving / preparing food where you bring out something that was not there, right? Obviously, there's some of our best foods are the results. I think that's part of a divine providence of applying an art to it. But we have to learn to distinguish between an art of preparing food that is always deeply aware of enhancing the nutritional content at the same time as the taste aspect versus one where it's just, well, how do we simply make it taste better? How do we give it a longer shelf life? I mean, because the industry standards are going to push food production and preparation in the direction of, preservation, shelf life, for
because that's what serves their interest.
Exactly. And what will make it sell.
Right.
And so in sheer self-defense, we just have to say, okay, now we're going to have to come at this and apply the deeper principle from our home life, homestead, crafting the good life perspective, which is ultimately the perspective that should govern how food is produced. When food is more produced by arts in the home, It was done obviously
Yeah.
in such a way because people were highly aware of, those arts were
This is the whole reason for
health
doing it,
of the
is
people,
to
right?
nourish us,
And
right?
so the
Yeah.
more there's been that kind of separation of the industry from the actual people that are preparing it to be eaten by their own people, as it were.
Yeah.
These things have come in. Okay, so I don't think let's just,
Although
then
I
I
do
think we
just
can
want to
move
just
forward and be
say,
practical.
one more thing in that regard. It's not conspiratorial to say the food industry has an interest. And what we're required to do is say, is their interest the same as my interest as the person
Right.
who is running our
Good.
household? And so this is not about being conspiratorial. It's simply about recognizing there can be different interests here. And if you recognize what their interest is, which is to sell as much of this product as they can and make a profit on it, is that the same as my interest in purchasing the food and bringing it into our home?
Or does it dovetail with it? Because it might be the case at times, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
their interest has them produce something that fits with our interest. Great, fine, and right.
Exactly. So in other words, I guess the point I'm saying is that it doesn't have to be conspiratorial to say that. It's just a recognition, which I think we pretty much need to apply to everything that's in the world around us, because we're so disconnected from the kind of natural order for living through a lot of things that we really need to apply that in everything.
And
not
this
just
is hard.
food.
It's going to take some energy. I mean, one might reasonably say right now, is this feasible? And then I'm going to say, well, okay, well, what's the this? To me, the this, first of all, is most importantly a better attitude towards food. Take the domestic prudence, the household prudence approach, the art of crafting the good life approach to food. Of course, that's feasible. It's highly feasible. It might not be feasible that we concretize it in every way that we wanted to, but this new approach is very feasible. And then it being acted out in particular ways that involve getting, finding, producing better food, and preparing food also in a better way, because that is part of it. I mean, part of what it's worthwhile talking. We can't go under every nook and cranny of this wonderful topic, but learning, the restoring kind of those beautiful arts of food preservation, of food preparation, again, with an attentiveness to how are we doing here on nutritional content, right?
Because that's the purpose of food.
Exactly.
I mean, that is fundamentally the purpose.
Exactly.
The primary purpose of food is to nourish us. God, in his incredible characteristic beauty, also made it so that it comforts us, it enriches us, it has all the, but primarily and fundamentally, what we're looking at is the nutritional value of the food that we're bringing and preparing in our home. Would you kind of sum it up that way?
I mean, yes. Although I would. Although, watch. Let's. And then it kind of goes back to the good food. The most obvious and immediate meaning of good is nourishing, but then immediately we have the analogicity, the rich complexity of those nourishing in different senses, kind of healthy in different senses. The most first obvious one is good for our body. But right now, I wanted to kind of jump out and kind of expand that. And this is always the beautiful aspect of when we're looking for kind of the natural plan, because I think it's fair to say here there is a kind of a certain natural indications of a plan in nature of how to do this that we kind of respect. We end up finding this deep interconnection where, for instance, something that we might have done just to get healthier food, namely grow the vegetables ourselves to get that fresher, more ripe. Many of the vegetables we get in the store are not able to be grown to ripeness. Studies show that ripened. Makes a difference in their health for us and in their taste. To be able to, the proverbial, there's nothing like the vine ripened raspberry or tomato and whatever
apples.
It
they're
is,
all much better
because they taste better and they are more nutritious, because food is more nutritious when it is ripe versus meaning ripened on a plant versus ripened, in some
artificially in order to accommodate transportation and storage.
But I wanted to say that home production can also be healthy for us in other ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is a topic that we won't go way out into. We've had other discussions. I want to have more of the importance of good work in the home. Well, here's a healthiness of the, I like to say with food, there's kind of three steps, not necessarily in food. It has to be produced, grown, raised. It has to be prepared in some way, and then it's eaten. In homes, we're definitely, we're going to be eating it. Although in certain home, and more of the practice of home life is sometimes it's not even eaten there, right? That's not our issue right now. But by and large, in many of our homes, it's not. If you look at the other two, in a smaller and smaller number is it produced, and even a smaller and smaller number is it even prepared there.
Sure.
But just to look at producing and preparing, many of the home arts were about those two things. Milking a cow, taking care of the sheep, raising the vegetables, grafting
Fattening
trees,
a pig.
all of those things.
Yeah.
All arts of producing, and then the great arts of cooking, right? Of preparing that often go hand in hand with preserving, such as smoking, that one at the same time can preserve it and make it taste better. Right. So just to note, healthy, good food, it's really neat. This is something I say, look out for the ways that you can at one and the same time get better food, and it gives you that great, cool way of a new way of being together as a family in this good work that then carries over when you're eating it also to that greater sense of gratitude. And there's just so many rich veins of the good food. We've had a discussion, haven't we, Dira? It was one of our very first podcasts of, the family pig slaughter. I mean, nourishing food. There's in many ways, this is kind of an archetype for us. We've been careful what we have fed our pigs, how we have raised them. We are careful in how we do the work together of killing, slaughtering, butchering, and then even of then how we then prepare it.
Sure.
All of these kind of go together, and it makes for something that tastes better and is more nutritious and gave us the joy of working together.
Yeah.
Talk about good food.
Yeah. I would almost say that, I said, okay, the principle is that the importance of food is that it nourishes you. And of course you drew that out to say it nourishes you in many ways. And I would say that for me, kind of in this journey of discovery of good food, that's actually a litmus test for me of whether the food is actually nourishing for your body. Does it also nourish you in other ways as a human being? Because kind of along the way, as I've tried to prepare food, find food that's more nourishing and prepare it so that it retains its nutritional value, it's demanded something of me. And, first I go kicking and screaming, and then finally settle down and start observing. And I realize, oh my goodness, the preparation and the care that's given to maintaining this food's nutritional value, sometimes enhancing it, is actually making me into something. And so I think really when food is kind of treated respectfully, and you remember that principle, it's designed to nourish us. It requires something of us as human beings interfacing with it, which is different. If we don't do that, that new thing doesn't become a reality inside of us. And so for me, actually, the nutritional value of food, respecting that, enhancing it, and actually, that's kind of a litmus test. Is it really healthy for you? Well, does it allow you to short circuit the whole process for your convenience? It's going to have a limited value. I'm not saying, this is not saying that everything has to be brutally hard and take tons of time, because there's certain things that are respecting the food that are very simple, and it's just very quick. Yeah. So I'm not saying that it has to be labor intensive, but even just becoming aware of I don't want to steal your thunder, because I know you want to read some things from Wendell Berry, but the line that you read, the line that you read during your discussion group for LifeCraft was, eating has to be part of the next step of an agricultural act, of the agricultural act. Yeah. Is that the line?
Eating is an agricultural act.
He says eating is an agricultural act.
Lines in there, yeah.
Again, it was like, oh my goodness, hearing that. I respect the food. We very much have this attitude toward the food that we prepare in our home. But hearing just that one sentence, eating is an agricultural act, just elevated my whole handling and preparation of food to another level of, oh my goodness, I'm continuing this good thing. Maybe I didn't grow it, but somewhere, or woman tilled the soil, nourished the land, cared for the seed, grew it up, harvested it, and then I have it. And now I'm going to continue that unbelievable process of dignity and respect by the way I prepare it, and then give it to my family, who will then consume it and almost give it like another level of dignity that
Amen.
now it's nourished the
Amen.
body of
Amen.
the individuals in my home.
And
So,
it goes on, and it just goes on, and you're empowered then to go and do other great things and serve people and
in other
praise
ways,
God,
yeah,
and all of that
because you are nourished. Yeah.
is all rooted in that.
Yeah.
You couldn't have made up this plan. How food works is there's something divine in it.
Yeah. And again, going back to, it must be, if God made it be something that we just can't get away from.
Exactly.
He wants us to do it. And he has a plan in the doing of it if we respect it and really are silent enough to really look and see, what does this mean in our life? We really begin to
Amen.
discover much
Amen.
greater things. Yeah.
And this is not about guilt. This is not about proving yourself or outdoing the Jones. We you don't have to do it better than anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And if certain of these things, then you start to have a sense of, oh, well, that sounds nice, but I can't do that. Well, if you can't do it, then don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Find the things that you can do.
Mm-hmm.
This is about
thing.
peace and joy and receiving the gift of being more attentive to a very simple and necessary part of human life,
Mm-hmm.
and upping the ante there.
Mm-hmm.
And doing it in a more human way. I love to quote the line from Andrew Lytle, or our life as it becomes more technologized, we're losing the ordinary functions of human life.
Yeah.
Eating and all these things we're talking about that go along with it, they're ordinary functions. They're ordinary because God designed them to be there. And they have extraordinary fruits.
Mm-hmm.
If we're but just willing to try to be docile and receptive to a natural plan that's better than we could have realized.
Yeah. Yeah.
But can I? Shout out to a book, by the way. We keep using the word nourishing. A lot of people know this book, the book called Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon.
Yeah, we absolutely love it.
We've learned a lot from that book. It has this whole spirit. Even in the very name, Nourishing Traditions, there's that. Surely, I don't know, but there must be a double entendre of their traditions of how to nourish yourself with food, and the very traditions themselves are nourishing. Acting in these ways nourish you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a beautiful approach to food, and there's recipes in there, and it explains a lot of the problems of dairy that's treated in a certain way, how they thought that homogenization was this great step forward. No, actually, homogenization is not a great step forward. And a lot of things in the weeds like that we're not experts in, but experts are quoted at great length here, I think, in a very meaningful, helpful way.
Yeah, so that book is written by Sally Fallon. We'll put it in the show notes. But also, I just wanted to say, the way it's designed, it's really a cookbook, but in the margins, it talks about traditional cultures from all over the world, how they treat food. And very often when we don't have the benefits of technology, then we really understand how food reacts to things, because we don't have artificial ways of preserving it. And so it's a way of understanding better what the nutritional value of food is and kind of how it's affected people in the past. And so that's actually what we love. And sometimes we sit at the table and just open the book and just read the stuff in the margins out loud. Yeah. So anyway, we really enjoy that.
Let me just reel off a couple things that we've always done for many years. The thing of soaking nuts and then drying them as making them to be more digestible. Soaking rolled oats and then using that to make your oatmeal. Making
fermented foods. They're Latin
of all
American
kinds.
Sauerkraut.
We've made that often from our own cabbage. If not from our own cabbage, we just buy organic cabbage.
And then tonics and superfoods like kvass, which I'm Ukrainian.
Beet
that
kvass.
Is totally in my
we got our
heritage.
Recipe for beet kvass from there, and there's lots of neat anecdotes about how studies now are showing these ways of those simple arts that these cultures had, that was maybe born of a certain necessity of what they needed to do to preserve foods, actually, clearly by a divine plan, actually brought out certain kind of nutrients that wouldn't have been brought out otherwise. and the apple cider vinegar, when made from good apples, and you actually leave the actual mother in there, just you
Yeah.
start to these things start to become habitual. It's not out of being finicky and choosy and turning up your
Or
nose.
having a designer diet or something
It's
like that.
exactly.
I actually have to say one other thing that I really have loved about that book is that makes me feel a connection to the past. Seeing the way other
Yeah,
cultures and
yeah,
previous
yeah,
generations manage food, and now I'm learning how to do it. As a matter of fact, my grandmother, who lived to 101, who spent most of her life in a Ukrainian village, she came. We were taking care of her toward the end of her life, and she sat at the counter while I was grinding my own grain and making sourdough bread. And she said, "Oh, wow, that's really amazing. I mean, we used to do that all the time. And boy, we would always die for the bread we'd have for feast days that had had all the germ out, and it was just white and special bread. And nobody liked the everyday bread. And here you're like choosing to do that." She was like, "Wow, that's amazing." And I was chuckling to myself that something that for her was second nature, I had to like find a book and go online and figure out where to order things and how to get a grinder. And for her, like, we had, even in that one generational gap, had lost so much knowledge that she could have taught me
yeah,
all those things. And
yeah,
so it's very fun for me to read Nourishing Traditions. It actually makes me feel connected to previous generations and in the
yeah,
constant engagement
yeah.
interaction with food.
And I'm sure there's other resources. I mean, really, there is a revival, right?
Yeah,
And
it's
and and
wonderful.
and these arts are being rediscovered, because human nature is always at work in us. There's good
Mm-hmm.
things afoot of people recognizing, hey, we need to kind of take some of these matters into our own hands and not just not just eat what's served up to us,
Mm-hmm.
and take more responsibility. We're really encouraging and do this from the best perspective. It's not because it's just like you said, a designer diet, and it's not simply to live longer.
Yeah.
It's especially to be healthy,
Yeah. And it's not out
to
of
serve
fear.
the higher goods,
Mm-hmm.
for the sake of a deeply human life, for the sake of relationship. We
Mm-hmm.
want our children to be as healthy as possible. There's other things that we have to attend to, right? Bodily health is important. There's a lot of challenges and toxins and things we have to look for, and a lot of extra challenges. And it doesn't come down simply to food, but food is always one of the fundamental ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right,
Yeah.
just a couple things from the this is in the book by Wendell Berry, a collection of essays. It's called "What Are People For?" The essay, this one's called "The Pleasures of Eating." This one, it opens by saying, many times after I finished a lecture on the decline of American farming and rural life, someone in the audience has asked, what can city people do? Eat responsibly, I have usually answered. Of course, I have tried to explain what I meant by that, but afterwards I've invariably felt that there was more to be said that I had been able to say. Now I would like to attempt a better explanation. So you all can look up this essay. It's readily available. You can find it online. We had a reading group on it, and we'll probably have another one at some point. But in any case, he makes a lot of great, I say, kind of broadly philosophical principles in here. And this is where he does say eating is an agricultural act. He talks about this, what do we mean by eat responsibly, and how all things are interconnected. But then he ends up with just a list, and I just want to bang off a few from the list that I think will really connect with some of the things we've been saying here. One, participate in food production to the extent that you can. He goes on, if you have a yard or even just a porch box or a pot in a sunny window, grow something to eat in it. Make a little compost of your kitchen scraps. Use it for fertilizer. Only by growing some food for yourself can you become acquainted with the beautiful energy cycle that revolves from soil to seed to flower to fruit to food to offal to decay and around again. You will be fully responsible for any food that you grow for yourself, and you will know all about it. You will appreciate it fully, having known it all its life. I think it's a really
Yeah. That's
beautiful way of
amazing.
just saying,
Yeah.
to the extent possible. It's nourishing in so many ways. All right. The second one, then, kind of building upon that. But again, sometimes that one, first one's not going to be possible for everyone. Prepare your own food. This means reviving in your own mind and life the arts of kitchen and household. Those are his words. This should enable you to eat more cheaply and will give you a measure of quality control. You'll have some reliable knowledge of what has been added to the food you eat. And I'm not going to read the descriptions of all of them, but just third, learn the origins of the food you buy and buy the food that is produced closest to your home. 4, whenever possible, deal directly with a local farmer, gardener, or orchardist. 5, learn in self-defense as much as you can of the economy and technology of industrial food production. What is added to food that is not food, and what do you pay for these additions? 6, learn what is involved in the best farming and gardening. 7, and finally, learn as much as you can by direct observation, experience, if possible, of the life histories of the food species.
Mm.
Right? And now there he's taking a little bit of a broader approach. This is what he means by eat responsibly. And there he's taking this in a broader social context, where his not his only concern is healthy food. And of course, ours has been more than just healthy food too. Eating responsibly isn't the exact same thing as good food, but I think all of those they all fit with being more nourished by our food, seeking more, having the knowledge to seek more nourishing food, and to support others in this, and to help educate others, even about, if it's about certain things we can't do ourselves.
Yeah. I love those 7 points. Those are amazing. Shall we just dive into some practical?
Well, that was,
those are a great practical springboard. I would throw a couple more things in there.
Let's just throw in some very, miscellaneous, concrete things. Go.
Yeah. So first of all, sometimes people, I want to just back up and say, I think it's very important for us to eat organic. And I just want to say that because when we're talking about non-organic foods, what we're primarily referring to is the pesticides used on them, pesticides and herbicides. And those are chemicals. And you would never put those chemicals inside your body. You would never choose to pick up a pinch of that and put it on your tongue.
There's always a residual.
And there's always residual, even especially when you're talking about things like vegetables. Those things stay on your food. And also grains are a big deal. And, frankly, meat, this is part of what goes into the flesh of the animals that you're eating. So organic is super, super important. And I know for a lot of people, organic is more expensive. And so that's the kind of initial concern. Oh my goodness, I don't think we could afford that. We have a large family. And for my experience, we just decided to make that commitment that that's where our money goes. Does that mean that the money there isn't money for other things? Yes. So it may be more. So Wendell Berry says it's less expensive. It is if you're growing your own, but not many of us don't have that.
Or preparing your own.
Or preparing.
Yeah. Versus like eating out.
Yes, eating out.
Pre-prepared foods.
Yes, of course. But even if you're making everything from scratch, to buy organic bell peppers versus conventional bell peppers, they're just more expensive. And I just want to encourage people to maybe look at it from the perspective that there are other things that we're not going to get in order to be able to keep to that commitment. And for us, I have found that what it means is that, in fact, I do shop less in the center part of the grocery store, because those are things that are non-essential food products that are kind of treats, snacks. And in the end, they're really not healthy for us, even if those are labeled as organic. So, organic extruded grains are not really how grain was meant to be treated. So it doesn't matter if the puffs are organic. They're probably not that good for you. And they're also exceedingly expensive. So what we have found is that it's by committing first to buying good produce and food, it does limit our choices as to other things that we can buy. And we've actually found that we've come out better and healthier for excluding things that aren't essential, that end up often not being that healthy. So that's just.
But that were fun to eat, those fun snacks, those fun desserts.
Yeah.
And we're not saying that there's no place for that in life. We're none.
But I do think that kind of generally what is promoted to us and the atmosphere of eating that we're in, people eat an awful lot of that stuff. And there's a lot of boredom eating happening. And I'll just mention quickly that boredom eating actually, it's part of the reason it's a problem is if you're boredom eating, there's something else you need, and it's usually something emotional. And if you're covering it up with cheap foods, you're actually not being forced to say, well, what is it that I really am wanting here? What problem do I really need to deal with? So, apart from it not being good for your body, it does cover up something that in fact we really need to attend to in order to be healthy persons. So
I just want to quick follow up on the organic. it's not as though I mean, there's controversies about the label organic and how in certain ways there's things that are now allowed that shouldn't be allowed. We're not going into that. I think, Sophia, when you say organic, you're just fundamentally saying anything we can do to get foods that don't have these
Right.
pesticides,
Right.
these herbicides, these genetically modified, and preservatives of various sorts. I mean, we go with the organic label on a number of things that we get. For instance, we've also read that certain vegetables, it's very important to get organic versus non-organic. Remember, like potatoes, onions were on the list because there's certain things that are sprayed on the other ones to keep them from sprouting.
That are more
These
damaging.
These are just things we have to educate ourselves on. And so but it's not as though just simply the organic label is going to solve this situation. Sure. But it's going to be part
of
a
step toward
a spirit and an approach of trying to support, people that are trying to do something different, and kind of that defense of protecting ourselves from things that we should be protecting ourselves from.
Yeah. And so, of course, an ideal would be if you are part of a CSA and you know the people who are growing it and the farm is local and you know that they're not using pesticides or herbicides on their that's obviously the ideal. Many of us are not in a situation that we can do that. And so when we buy at the grocery store, so first of all, I just wanted to kind of address the issue of cost.
No, sure.
And if you are doing organic at a grocery store, it is more expensive. But I would recommend avoid the snacks and do the essential kind of closer, less processed items. And you probably will find that you might even be doing better financially as regards your food bill. If not better, then at least the same. It wouldn't be significantly more expensive.
Yeah.
And then the other practical thing I wanted to address is that eating this way, actually, there's no argument about it, takes much more time and effort in the preparation of food. So I just, if you're not using prepackaged, canned soups, if you're not, there's all kinds of stuff that makes cooking much easier. And I have found, we pretty much, I make everything from scratch. We also live in an area that we don't have, fabulous bakeries because we don't live in a metropolitan area, and we don't have certain kinds of butchers and stuff. So if we want special things, I have to make everything, which has turned out to be good, but it is very labor intensive. So I want to acknowledge that it is going to require a commitment.
Everyone can do it.
Certainly, maybe you can't do it across the board. I would argue maybe there's one thing you can do. And actually, my sister made a great point when we first discovered Nourishing Traditions. It can be just totally overwhelming. You just want to shut the book and just say, okay, I just give up. And she just said, I think it's better if you just choose one thing that you're going to change. Just choose one item that seems like it's important, and everything else you can keep doing the same, even if though it might not be ideal, but just choose one thing and do that one thing. As your commitment grows and your experience grows, you might find that you're spending a lot more time in the kitchen preparing food. And I think actually that's part of the way good food works on us. It makes us have to dwell with our mind and in our intention in the heart of our home. Like I said, kicking and screaming, I came to that. And then finally over time realized it's actually it's growing something good in me as regards my attitude toward my home and my place in the home. So it takes more work. It is worth it. It's a perfect opportunity to invite other members of the family to participate in that work. And of course, it's a fabulous way if you're drawing children into the cooking experience for them to learn and understand the nutritional value of the ingredients that you're putting together. I feel like our family experiences the food at the dinner table as an expression of my love for them, which is my goal when I cook for them. And, part of it is the time that I have put into it. So, I think that's also another side benefit. And I'll just throw in, because we're talking about lots of work, that cooking everything from scratch generally also produces way more dishes than cooking things instant, instant packaging. And so I just have to say, to that extent, dishes are no one person's responsibility in the household. It's the entire household's responsibility. Amen. And so, cooking things more from scratch is going to require kind of a shift by everybody, that it's not just participating by preparing the food or growing it, but that the dishes that are made and making it are everyone's responsibility. And that really makes the burden a little bit easier. So, that's just something that it took me a while to figure out. Oh, why is this so overwhelming? Oh, there are all these additional dishes that need to be done. So, I just wanted to acknowledge that and kind of forewarn that will have to be part of the mental shift if you're transitioning to more real food preparation and use in the home.
Amen. And will be a good occasion to have these conversations. That is maybe one of the greatest fruits of this is have this be a point of discernment and discussion and prayer between spouses, with your children, because it's ultimately about the home life, a rich home life, renewing our home life, deepening our home life, growing as persons. Food is a God-given instrument in the whole realm of doing food. It's a God-given instrument in doing that. And it's in that spirit that we have been thinking about and descending into details and popping back out to the universal. So a lot more to discuss there. We weren't able to do everything that we might have wanted, but it was great to be able to talk about it as much as we were.
Yeah, it sure was.
Very glad you all could join us. Yeah. Take care. Thanks for tuning in this episode of The Intentional Household. If you've enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and leave a rating or review. If you have any topic requests, please send them to lifecraftgroup@gmail.com. For our Wednesday reflections, free courses, reading groups, and live events, please visit life-craft.org.